Good evening, everybody. Glad to have you with us tonight. This is another episode of Poultry Keepers 360 Live, and we got a really great show for you guys tonight. We've got Mandelyn Royal, and I've always admired her writing, her videos, and I thought, hey, we need to get Mandelyn on the show, and she agreed, and we're going to have fun tonight. So we're looking forward to a great show. Hey.
Hey.
We're all here. There's myself and there's Mandelyn in the upper right-hand corner. And there's Miss Karen, our genius on the keyboard, who keeps us straight and everything running as it should be and pops in with good questions from time to time. So, Mandelyn, welcome to the show. I'm really excited about having you on. Like I said in the introduction, I have always admired your writing. It's always well thought out, well written. And your videos have just really caught my attention. I wish I could do videos as good as you can. I know there's a lot of planning that goes into it and a lot of post-production editing and all that kind of good stuff. And I appreciate that. You done good. So
I just bring my phone out and start going. There's no editing.
Well, even more impressive then.
That's right. Everything's working in your favor. It's the only thing I got to say about that. Mandelyn, this is a chance for you to get to know us a little bit better and the folks who are watching to get to know you a little bit better. And she's done some great things with her birds, and we're going to get into that later. But Mandelyn, I want to ask you right off the bat, why did you start keeping chickens? What attracted you to chickens?
I've always been a sucker for animals in general. So growing up, we had the whole assortment of dogs and cats and guinea pigs, rabbits. I had hedgehogs. So my family in Tennessee, my great uncle, he raised a lot of birds and he had all kinds. And we would go down there every Easter. And I asked him when I was about 6 years old, can I have a chicken? And he said, honey, if you can catch it, you can keep it. 6 hours after that, I had a little Bantam pellet cot, and I've had chickens ever since then.
I'm surprised at the number of people that I run into that started out pretty much the same way. And I think that's great. I know you're working with the American Bresse right now, but what led you to want to work with Bresse? What was your evolution from a little black Bantam pullet to those beautiful Bresse you have?
Well, it went from the ornamentals and the fun stuff. I went through a phase where I wanted the frizzles and the cochins and Polish. Then I just wanted breakfast eggs, and I ran through sex links and the higher production layer birds. And then I got into hatching, and I realized half the hatch is male, and they're not going to lay eggs. And nobody wanted them. So I was at the grocery store buying chicken probably about 8 years ago, and I had 17 leg bar cockerels at home. And I was like, aren't they going to taste like chicken? So I went home with this new idea to tell my husband, we're going to be dual purpose. We're going to try this out. And those birds were terrible. So we went on a little breed trying marathon to figure out how to get the meaty boys so that then half the hatch is still equally productive. And we ended up with the Bresse because they had the meatiest body type in the shortest amount of time from everything else we had tried. But there's so much variation between bloodlines, like you can't judge a breed.
Yeah,
totally, because I've seen birds that performed really well in other breeds, but it just wasn't true breed wise. So it seems like it's more a breeding type kind of thing.
And I think it has a lot to do with the breeder skill that you got your birds from. If they place emphasis on meat and egg production, then if you're interested in that, that's kind of what you're looking for. But if it's just strictly for exhibition or for personal enjoyment, they're not going to perform well for you in the production department.
Yeah, so we had a lot to muddle through to figure that out. And I latched on to the first thing that did it.
I got a question. I know it's important to have goals, and I talk about it a lot. And you kind of briefly got around the edges of your goals. But what are your goals for your flock? Let's give me some specific examples. How do you want your birds to perform?
I like to see a dress weight of like 4 to 5 pounds within 16 to 18 weeks. And I can go through more cycles within a season because we try to put at least 175 birds in the freezer every year. And I've got a meat buyer too who helps us out. But I also want to work on standardizing the birds, and I want to work at getting them correct for what they should be, in addition to being useful. And that takes a lot of quantity to work through in that effort. And then the laying part, to keep myself supplied with hatching eggs, breakfast eggs, to keep that moving. I try to add pellets every season to work on the goals every season. And I'll run 6 different pens for 6 different reasons. Just to try to work on all of the goals, because you can't do all of that in one pen.
No.
That's impossible.
What has processing your own birds taught you about your birds?
I didn't know there was such a thing as internal variations. And I learned, like, one little tidbit is the boys are coming into maturity and getting interested in girls at about that 18-week-old point. And fertility is something that's really important to keep your flock going. And when you have like really calm, docile boys and you're kind of like, oh, this one's sweet, I want to keep it. But then you muscle up and go ahead and process it. And the testicles are undersized. That bird wasn't going to be that fertile. Or there might be one missing. Not even there. You know you should go in there and find 2, and then you don't. Yep. And I never thought about that at all, ever. Not even on my radar until I started getting inside of the bird. The way they put on fat is interesting from breed to breed. If it can form in between the ribs and along all of the muscle edges, that varies a lot. And skeletal stuff too. Once you get in there, feathers hide a lot.
What have you learned from the skeletal things?
The differences in back length, and I don't know, you've probably seen roach back before where it'll curve upwards. That's a flaw, but sometimes the thickness of the feathers can hide that until you have them defeathered. There's variations in how the legs can sit on the body, the length of the leg, the length of the thigh, and I think that influences how the fleshing can lay over the bird based on how they're built, and then condition too. But the frame is what gives the space for the meat to go onto. That's what it seems like.
Exactly right. Let's circle back a little bit. You talked about males that have small testicles are usually meek and mild. What have you seen from aggressive males? What about the size of their testicles?
Oh, they're huge. I've seen turkey-sized ones coming out of an excessively mean cockerel, right about 24 weeks old or so, and he's raging. Yeah, the significant size difference. And it usually reflects the attitude and the demeanor.
Let's go to your what you were talking about, the skeletal and the legs. Have you noticed any variation about where the hip joints are on your birds and how that affects their type?
Not specifically. It wasn't on my radar, really. I know it can influence how wide they can stand and the proportions to the rest of the bird. But I was more interested in what the keel was doing, what the fleshing was doing, and the overall proportions. Noticing the particular setting, I wasn't really looking for that yet. Now I might.
And you gave me a picture, and we're going to get to it later, but I'll try to show you what I'm talking about. when the leg placement comes pretty much in the center of the body, you get a more horizontal type body carriage. If the legs go forward a little bit, then you start getting this angle to the back.
Oh, we can use that hen picture now if you want.
No, but no, let's save it. I don't want to spoil you.
Okay.
But I don't want to get them out of order because it'll confuse both Karen and I.
That is not hard to do.
No, it's not for me.
Do you want to answer John's questions now? Should we do them along the way?
Yeah, why not?
All right. So John wants to know if the higher testosterone changes the flavor of the meat at all. If you've noticed, do you write on the package large testicle?
No, it still tastes like chicken.
Okay. Good to know. All right. That's all. That's it for now.
Okay, you did good. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Describe for me your perfect dual purpose bird. What are we talking about in egg numbers, and what are we talking about body weight? Now, you talked about that a little bit, but let's kind of delve into that, because that's something I always find fascinating. It becomes a real aha moment for people, and I know you've had that. But so, what's your ideal breast? What do they do? How do they look?
Well, I don't know. They're still very much a work in progress as far as the variety goes. But I like to see at least 250 eggs a year. When they're in active lay, I see 5 to 6 eggs a week. And then it varies on how long they're actually in active lay. So if they go and they take a 4-month break, it drives down your annual. But when they were active, they were doing 5 to 6 a week. So I have to watch them seasonally, and then as they mature. And if I start out with 50 pullets at 6 months old, by the time they're 2, I might be down to just 15 of them, just to sort out for laying performance, because you really have to watch that performance in order to keep a good thing going. And I try to keep the laying traits within their own pen, so that on the male side, not that I'm doing like male-female lines, but in another pen, I want really strong fleshing, and I'm a little forgiving on the egg laying, to where I'll use a 7-pound-year-old hen, and she'll throw that table type forward, but I'm using a male from the high producing layers to keep balance, not chasing one thing too far, because if you do that, you change too much about them.
Yep.
So rather than what the ideal is, it's more about keeping a good thing going and maintaining that while working on their physical traits and how they look and stuff without changing the performance. It's tricky.
What? And honestly, I don't know if you've covered this, and you probably have, but what weight do you strive for? Do you process your birds at 16 weeks, 18 weeks? What's the ideal weight you're looking for in your males when you process them?
I like 4.5 pounds within that category, whether they are or not. Sometimes I get one that's 3 pounds, but that's why he was in a shrink bag, because he grew too slow and he didn't reach the goal weight. So my largest sort is at 16 to 18 weeks old, and I take their growth history, and chances are my favorite boys are already in a separate pen, and all the dinner boys are growing out in their own pen. And I usually have that figured out by 8 weeks.
I'm here listening to you and talk about the things you track and when you track it and how you evaluate them and all this stuff. You and Karen, it would be dangerous to get you two together in a conversation. I would love to be a fly on that wall, because
Karen's more detailed. She does such better notes and data collection than I do. I wing half of what I do.
The weights you're talking about, though, are those live weights or are those processed weights?
Processed.
Okay, so
the live weights are 6.5, 7 pounds, maybe a little over 7 pounds.
That's what I wanted to specify. I'm like, you're not looking for a 4-pound live bird. Yeah.
By the time I dress down and I've got the neck off and the feet off and everything cleaned out, I'm at 61% of the live weight.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds like you're winging it if you know that much information.
We're down to the 61%. My husband figured it out for me. He did my math.
But and now this isn't an insult to you, but that's just part of showing how the work still needs to happen, because that's a very low percentage of weight. Now you are taking off necks. That would make lots of times when the pasture poultry people do the process, they leave the necks on to.
They'll put some more stuff inside of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
You'll get your giblets.
Yeah, exactly. So they're running it like, a good.
I take off the tail nub and the oil gland. I take off the very tip of the wing sometimes.
Okay.
So thoroughly dressed is at 61%.
Yeah. And I think honestly, anything over 72 is pretty good. So, but that's with, like you said, the extra.
Because you can take the neck and the feet and put them right back up in there.
I don't think they usually include the feet, but you're right. They usually leave that, like I said, depending on the producer, they often leave the neck on and that sort of thing.
That doesn't fold into the bag right unless you take it clean off. I tried that and it looked weird. I'm looking at the big one. That's unattractive.
It does look weird. Yeah. No doubt about it.
Mandelyn, how have your breeding goals evolved over time? I think that's something we all go through naturally. We get to a point and say, all right, I want to accomplish X, Y, Z. And then when I accomplish X, Y, Z, where do I go from there? Have you experienced that?
I look at what problems the flock is showing at the highest percentage. So my very first season, it was not great fleshing, but there were like 3 birds that showed me that they could do it. So first I worked on the width, because it was the wider set, longer bodied birds that had the fleshing. Mm-hmm. And I spent probably 2 seasons chasing that. Once it was solidified, I realized combs had gotten completely out of control. So I set up a pen and worked on combs to bring them down, because some of the males, the comb got so ridiculous, it folded over. It was completely out of control, but man, were they meaty. So then I noticed that leg color was starting to falter and they were starting to get too pale. So then I had to work on that. And I was always looking for what's the common flaw that are in most. Then that's the thing you have to put on your list for that next season.
I
you can't do it all one season. You got to chip away at it.
Focus on individual birds and individual traits, and they get kind of muddled up in all that. But I have found it better to work on what is a flock average, because you're raising a lot of birds. So the flock average, at least to me, is an important evaluation tool.
Yeah. So every season I'm looking at what's the average worst thing about them.
Yeah, well, that's probably a better way to look at it than what's the absolute best thing about them, to be honest with you. We've got a picture of some of your birds that have been processed and some of the eggs that you get from your flock. Karen, can you pull that up? Those are great looking carcasses, I'll be honest with you. Those are, the one on the left is 4 pounds. And the one on the right is 4 pounds, 2 ounces.
Yeah.
That's the one thing, I'll be honest with you, I've been impressed about breasts, because when I look at them in photos of the live birds, I'm sitting there thinking, there's not much breast or front on those birds. But then when you look at them all nicely wrapped up like this, there's a lot of meat there. There's a lot of meat there.
They cook really nice.
Oh, I bet they do. How does your egg size running now? I know I got some breast early on when they first hit this country, and I was not impressed with those little bitty eggs.
Well, how much time did you give them?
Oh, I had them about 4 years.
Oh, no, you should have known their egg size, because the pullets, they might start at 15, 16, 17, 18 weeks old, and it might only be 40 grams. But by the time you give them a month to figure out the system, then that egg size might go all the way to 92 grams while they pump out some double yolks for a couple of weeks.
Oh.
And then it'll stabilize and drop back down between like 55 grams up to 70 grams by the time they've been laying for 6 weeks to 3 months, depending on the individual.
Mine struggled to lay a medium-sized egg consistently,
Oh,
and that was
good. That's not dual purpose at all.
not as
No.
advertised.
Notice he's not still raising them. He needs to get his next batch
Right.
from you. Yeah.
And he went back to Rhode Island.
Well, and I have been passionate about Rhode Island Reds since my early on experiences with poultry. I just keep coming back to them. They're just a stunning looking bird. And everybody said, well, that's an easy bird to breed. And I was sitting there thinking, you've never raised Rhode Island Reds, let me tell you. And I think Karen would back that up too, because about the time you think you got them figured out, those suckers will throw you a curveball.
I think that's true of every breed. Anybody who actually breeds any breed, everybody thinks everybody else's are harder or easier. Yeah. Easier.
Well,
Mine are solid white. That's kind of easy. But then you have chances for yellowing and black spot leakage and all kinds of weird stuff. So even just solid white.
Throw in the leg color. And that's something leg color is something I struggle with in reds. I mean, it's not slate colored like your birds, but the line of reds that I have, and I don't know if Karen's experienced this or not with her birds, but those legs bleach out really quick. But I digress here.
We're getting sidetracked.
Well,
that's the interesting part. Yeah.
I do that easily. Karen, there's also a picture of some of her birds that she cooked. That throw that up there, and if your mouth doesn't water when you see these birds, something wrong with you. Now, one thing I want to point out about this bird on the left, you see they've got really good length of legs. And if you're wanting a dual purpose bird that can forage, that's some of the things you want to look for. Those birds are built for moving around, scratching and finding bugs and picking up grass seeds and all kinds of things. But that's a good indication of a bird that can be turned loose on pasture pretty easily.
They do great at that.
Oh, yeah, I bet they do.
You're right. I am hungry now. Thanks.
You can have
get a Q25 for about 3.5 hours or so. Applewood.
Don't start.
Yeah, don't tempt me.
That's cruel and inhuman punishment now. Come on. What has been your greatest challenge in breeding birds?
Oh gosh.
Just pick one. Yeah.
Going through the gauntlet of finding the ones I wanted to stick with and then learning the ins and outs of that variety and how long it takes to feel like you can even have a grasp of what's going on with them. That didn't come overnight, and it felt like we were always building. We were always investing. Our feed bill would get out of control when I had a new bright idea of what I was breeding for. And I'm like, I got to have 300 birds this season so I can find the 5 birds that are doing the things. And just keeping it all straight and staying on top of it, especially if working full time. It can be challenging just keeping the flock as tidy as they need to be, as well spaced as they need to be, and making sure they're well taken care of so that you actually see their potential. But grow out season is probably one of the more challenging times.
Why do you say that?
My population goes from 40 birds on up towards 200-300 at a time.
And you're looking at them constantly. You
know every day.
Yeah.
After work, I would walk out there and just stare at birds and then go, oh, I need to handle that one. Oh, I need to handle that one. And before you know it, I've been out there for 3 hours. Dinner hasn't been cooked yet, and I got to start thinking about going to bed.
And this is not an official question, so you can tell me that you don't want to say. But it sounds like you do sort the ones you like sooner rather than later, right? So when you're out there and you're like, I need to handle that one, Do you have a marking system, or do you physically move them somewhere?
I physically move them.
Okay, so
I have a brand new box of unopened wing bands. There's 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
I just need to do it. I haven't.
You'll be thrilled. Once you do it the first time, you'll be thrilled.
Well, and I picked wing bands because they'll stay on the bird through processing.
Yeah. Once you start wing banding birds, you'll never go back to anything else.
Unless you do a terrible job. Unless you put them on terribly and they all get infected, like some people say. But I'm
a jewelry maker. I think I might be able to figure it out.
I have never seen one get infected.
Well, that's not what the internet says. So just know that it is a possibility.
Lordy, if the internet says no, it's got to be true, and sarcasm is intended on that one. All right, we talked about your greatest challenge, Mandelyn. What has been your greatest reward in breeding poultry?
The poultry community. I'm having fun helping people get started and to teach them some of the stuff that they're looking at and what they're sorting for and when to sort. The education aspect, because I stumbled along for so long and I didn't have poultry friends to bounce ideas off of, because I got started, late 80s. I wasn't in 4-H. I wasn't doing the show circuit or anything. So I stumbled through on my own for probably a good 10, 15 years. And then the internet started and forums came about and I started hearing stuff I've never heard before. And now I'm in a position to where I can return the favor and help some other people. And that makes it pretty rewarding.
Is anybody else sitting there thinking to themselves, she was alive in the 80s? That is the only thing I could focus on in that entire time.
I was not focusing on that because I was alive in the 50s. So
my dad was too.
Blew my mind a little bit. Okay.
I'm 31, Karen.
Karen, throw up that picture of that of the Breastbirds on pasture. You got
that one.
Tell us what do you see when you look at these birds, just as they are?
So if I remember right, these birds were 22 weeks old or so in that picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to see a deeper chest on the male. I think that looks a little shallow, but I know once the feathers are off, it won't look that way anymore. And he was one of my favorites early on, and I forgave him for his oversized comb. The wattles are too big, but they have that boxy shape that presents well in the shrink bag. Both of those birds had proven growth rate. That pullet had already been laying for 4 weeks, and they were already on the right track for dual purpose, even though they have some physical flaws to them from like a standard point of view. They scream utility.
I'm going to ask you a question you may not know the answer to. You were talking about the big comb on that male. When was he hatched? What time of the year?
February, probably.
So he was growing up when it was kind of hot.
I bet his brooder was toasty warm in the wintertime, and then after that it got hot.
I have found, and I'm just throwing this out there, but I have found that and I had the same problem with my reds, big beefy combs. And finally, somebody told me to drop the temperature in your brooder about 5 degrees.
I've started doing that the last 2 years. Now I'm seeing smaller combs.
And folks, if you're listening and you don't know what we're getting at here, but the combs and wattles on a bird are how they help regulate their body temperature. They can't sweat like you and I do. They can pant a little bit, but they use that comb and wattles to help radiate the heat out of their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
When it gets hot, when those chicks are growing up, they can wind up with big beefy combs because that's the only way they could kind of help cool their bodies.
Now your
baby chicks are a lot more resilient after 2 weeks. At that point, they're starting to make their own body heat, and they're not nearly as reliant on that bulb as the internet tells you. when they say to keep them heated until 8 weeks,
Nope.
nope.
I have yet to see a broody hen who keeps her chicks huddled up under her until they're 8 weeks old.
No, if they kick them to the curb 5,
Right.
6 weeks.
I was gonna say mine are outside at 4 weeks, but I am in North Carolina. A question though, you're treading on some dangerous territory there, Rip. Though you're changing their brooding conditions to change the outcome of the bird. So how do you ever know what's genetic and what's environmental?
No, I don't look at it that way.
Of course you don't, because otherwise.
Well, I look at it like I'm trying to replicate a natural condition for the chicks as they grow.
Okay.
I was having a conversation with somebody earlier about incubation, and excuse me, he was, well, the book says this, the book says that, and the book says something else. And I told her, I said, nah, you know, I've never seen a hen that could precisely regulate humidity for the eggs that she was sitting on them. Just doesn't happen. It would be kind of cool just to put one of those data loggers under a broody hen if she wouldn't kick it out of the nest, and you would you would see a lot of variation in temperature and humidity under that hen.
John agrees with me.
Yeah, well, I'll talk to John.
In fancier words. Yeah.
Doesn't it boil down to the results, though?
Does for me.
I would say pick something and stick with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, compare like to like. Don't compare across years. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So
the other
you still
thing
have control. Yeah.
I'll say about my reds is I was selecting for smaller comb size in the breeding pen, and I used to sell a lot of red chicks, and I was shipping chicks up. Gosh, I can't remember. It was way up north somewhere. Might have been Wisconsin and all that, and said, your bird's combs are just too small. And they sent me some pictures, and they look tiny compared to the birds I was raising down here
in Florida. Yeah.
So environment plays a definite role on how your birds are going to look.
It's tricky for us in Ohio because we get, 100 degrees, 105 in the summertime, but then winter comes blasting through. And like this past winter, we got down to 30 below wind chills, and we had to rush out there and wrap all the pens in plastic to try to protect those boys. And it worked, but they've got summertime combs more often than not, and they're not ready for winter. So we had to do a lot of work on managing them for winter care to offset that.
That's something I don't deal with very well, is cold weather. And I can imagine, I cannot imagine some of the things y'all go through up there when it gets so miserably cold in Ohio.
It's not that bad.
So Rip's environment has affected his typical
Seems
expression.
What can I say? Guilty.
All right, I'll let you get back on to what you're
All
supposed to be talking about. Sorry.
Let's throw up that picture of that female with the green line. There you go.
The balance.
What do you see when you see this bird? What's your impression, Mandelyn?
My eye goes straight to that feather sticking out of her wing. But I also see a pretty level carriage, a leg that's not too long, not too short, and pretty good proportions. I don't know about the curve of the beak, and she's got red earlobes when the breed should have white earlobes. But from that utility standpoint, she's plenty workable. And her bone spacing had measured out real nice, too. She had real good width in the pelvic spacing, and that's real important for laying.
Mm-hmm.
I still have her.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Yeah, she's a couple years old now, but she turned out to be real productive and real good, and she bred herself forward, too. So
that's she's talking about that level body carriage, but her legs are pretty much dead center under her body. So that helps produce that. And Karen, could you go back to the previous picture? See how both of these birds have a little bit of a downward tilt from the from the hackle to the base of the tail, it kind of slopes backward, and you can see that they have a slightly different leg carriage under their body. So just something to think about, something to look at. Food for thought.
This is just a breed question since I've never been physically around one of your breeds. Was she young? She looked young to me.
Yeah, I think she was like 18 weeks.
Okay, that's all. I'm just checking, making sure that's not what they look like as adults. Yeah.
No.
So.
What, Mandelyn, what do you think mostly shapes your breeding decisions?
The feel. Because if they don't have the meat, they're not going to get the meat until way later if they do. And waiting a year, year and a half, 2 years to figure out what kind of fleshing they're going to have, it's not going to work with our annual quota of dinner birds that we need to have. So if I chose a different variety that grew that slow, we'd be right back into commercial hybrids just to fill the freezer. And I'm trying real hard to avoid those and work with something that can at least come to dinner in 16 weeks. It's twice as long, but the weight's worth it. And they fill the need without having to branch off into having other varieties to do something different for us.
Well, and it's not like you want to eat a 2-year-old bird, no matter, even if that's when they put the flesh on it.
Not long enough.
Yeah.
A day and a half.
No.
Maybe have shredded chicken tacos or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about your breeding practices. Do you line breed? Do you flock breed? Do you use a clan or spiral mating system? What's your thoughts on that?
You pull them out of a hat, put all the numbers in.
Kinda. Well, so I've heard about all of the different breeding methods, and I've heard all of the benefits and downfalls of all of them. So I took a lot of them and mashed them together. And I let the birds tell me what method they need. So if I want to see a consistent result of birds that turned out pretty good and I want to keep that going, then I'm going to line breed them. Because if I introduce outside blood, if I introduce a bird from a different family, then I can change something within there. So I line breed to keep that consistent stuff consistent. But if I don't have everything there to make it consistent through line breeding, then I get experimental and a lot more selective in picking which birds I move forward with, which goes back into that quantity thing, because your 1 in 10 bird looks significantly different than your 1 in 100 bird. So if I know I need some trait that is not highly prevalent within the flock, I go and I find it, and I have to account for that individual bird's weaknesses to try to fix that in the other birds used with that bird. So it's kind of like a mashup of methods to get to results. And the birds tell me what to do, mainly. If I was rigid, I might be missing stuff. You got to be flexible with it, I think.
Larry's comment is spot on, and people think breeding is easy. Yeah, right.
Fun.
It is. That's to me is the greatest reward is when you put a breeding together and it does exactly what you hoped it would do, and you see good results from it.
Yeah, sometimes it's magic.
Yes. It's like
other times, like, no, not doing that again.
Let's talk about your grow out procedures. I know you've got a room with your incubators and your brooders in there, but where do you go from there? How do you manage your birds?
So I've got the hatch room with the incubators, and there's 2 brooders in there. And because of how awful chick dust is, they're on a 2-week maximum amount of time in that hatch room before I kick them out. And I've got 4 brooders. What did that work out to be? Like 96 square foot of brooder space. So roughly about 100 birds at any given time could be there up until like 3 to 4 weeks old before I need to move them and double their space. Because I set out to double their space every 2 weeks, all the way up until 12, 14 weeks or so, and then they're off into forage access. But I try to have them into the pens that have outdoor space by 8 weeks. And I try to sort them every 2 weeks, get my weights, figure out who is a viable keeper. Because after doing this for 7 generations now with the variety, I pretty well know what I like in terms of what I would look for. But I know that they're going to change a lot, so I keep extra. And by 16 weeks, I'm clearing out more space. I'm emptying out Rooster Coop. That's a separate building where the boys go that are probably dinner. And then I've got a pullet pen that reflects that, but it's out of sight from the boys so that they don't have anything to fight about. And once I'm down to, like, let's say I started with a batch of 25 chicks. By the time I'm at 16 to 18 weeks old, I probably have 6 total, 1 boy, 5 girls. And then I've got a lot of other 25 bird batches ahead of them or behind them, and they sift through this grow space. And then I go and I look at my breeding pens and I look at who I don't need anymore. And then I start condensing, consolidating, figuring out the breeding plan for the following season, start emptying pens so I can refill them. On and on.
Do you have a specific number of females that you look for in a breeding pen? I mean, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20, I don't know.
Anywhere from just 2, if it's some really specific breeding, up to about 8 usually. I don't like to overcrowd the pens. So the math says at 4 square foot per bird of inside coop space, I can have 12 per pen, but usually it's like 6 to 8.
There's a lot less cleaning when you do it that way.
Absolutely. I'm not trying to be out there every single day scooping poo.
Yeah.
And I don't use any straw anymore. Straw was a terrible idea for the pens. Sand and peat moss.
I just started saying, what do you use? I know I've seen peat moss in your brooders.
Oh, I love that. I love that stuff. Except the dust.
Jeff Maddox would give you a gold star.
Well, I was looking at the hemp bedding, and I finally found a local source for bales of hemp-based bedding. It's $35 a bale. It would cost me $380 to convert everything to that in one go before I cleaned anything. And I'm like, maybe.
Yeah, it'd just be a matter of how much often it needs to be replaced and how long does it last.
Yeah, so then my question is, does it last longer than the peat moss?
I doubt it.
Right.
Karen, and I know you use peat moss in your little chick barns. How often do you have to clean that out?
I'll say that. Never. Yeah. I haven't done it yet. How about that?
On my brooder trays, where I only put it in there about 1 inch thick, if that, I clean that when I change the birds out. So I get 2 weeks, and then when I move out those birds, dump the whole pan, freshen everything, sanitize it, and then move in the next batch.
I've never tried it in the brooder trays. The trays underneath the
it doesn't stick to the bottom of the tray. It cleans out so easy.
I use paper, but that sounds better.
That's super.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have wire.
Yeah.
Go, Karen. The next to the last photo for Mandelyn. There you go. There's
okay.
The brooder pens.
I got you. Yes, you wouldn't use paper there. That would be a disaster. Yeah.
Now,
those trays, there's dog pan trays that slide out of the front for cleaning. Yeah. And that front board, it just scrapes the chicks back so they don't come with the tray.
Okay.
It's working out really well.
Now,
do the chicks dance when you pull that out?
A little. And then they get freaked out because the floor is different and they run to the other side.
Yeah.
They don't like change.
In looking at that picture, there was 2 doors there, but is that 2 separate pens or is that 1 pen?
It could be 2 separate ones. So I designed it to take a divider, and that one doesn't have the divider in it based on the age of bird. They needed more space, so I can pull out the divider, and now they have double the space.
And that's nice when you have it that way because they can get away from the heat too.
Yeah.
And the water can get away from the heat. Yeah.
And I'm using 50-watt reptile bulbs instead, because the 250-watt red, that's too much. It's overkill.
Yeah.
And I mean, unless you have piglets in a giant barn in January, you don't need those bulbs.
Yeah,
The lower wattage.
Bulbs are a good way to start a barn fire too.
Yeah, I've seen it happen to coops, even locally. Every single winter, someone feels bad for their hens. They go out there, plug in that heat lamp,
and burn them down. Yeah.
and burn down the whole coop and kill all the birds because they felt bad, and those birds were going to be just fine without it. It's sad.
We talked about grow out. Let's talk about something that is fairly unique to Bresse, particularly in France, the way they are grown out and are finished off for processing. Can you, and as a matter of fact, John says, explain the special finishing diet.
Just take 1 minute. Yeah.
1 minute. Okay. So in France, they use mare's milk. Sometimes you'll see people in America saying that it's cow. It's not, it's mare. And sometimes it's powdered milk. They soak the grains for, I believe it's at least 24 hours. And they use only locally sourced grains. It cannot come from outside of the region.
Do they use a specific type of grain, Mandelyn?
I believe it's corn and wheat. I read through the French official AOC methods, and I had to translate it, and it didn't translate as clean as I would have hoped. But it's been a while because I saw some of those parameters that I wouldn't be able to meet. And I got so detailed as to looking at maps on the type of bedrock and the type of soil, because that matters there too for the mineral deposits and the pasture that they're grown on. And there's not a spot except maybe a little pocket of the Pacific Northwest in America that comes anywhere close to the type of soil and rock and mineral deposits they have in the soil within that Bresse region of France. And I stared at maps until I was like, this is too much. I got to stop.
You probably can't grow the wine or the grapes there either. Yeah.
No. Because they're going down to the minerals of the soil content in their methods. And who's going to do that here besides
nobody?
Maybe special restaurant birds.
Yeah. And
but for the regular homesteader farmer, we're not doing that.
That looks like it would be just an awful lot of trouble to do that.
It's worth it though. Like you'd have to go there and eat one, like a real one from a chef, to understand the variations in the flavor between that sort of process, because it doesn't stop at just the finishing. They age them for 10 days. They do a dry age. They sew them into linen wrapping. They sew them in there by hand and compress it, which makes the fat work into the muscle, so it comes up with more of a marbling effect.
Like I said, that's a lot of work.
The next time I'm in France, I know what I need to eat.
Mm-hmm.
It might cost the plane ticket to get there, but
and they probably want to cook it in a pig bladder, poached.
Oh, that's getting to be TMI right there.
So yeah, I throw mine some cracked corn, some wheat, and call it a day.
You can't be official anyway. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's not government regulated here either. Over there, it is. You can only call them just Bresse for the birds within that region. Outside of that, they're called Bresse Galloway. My pronunciation is anywhere near it.
Loose or something like that.
Yeah. Funny side story. I got fired from a French pastry shop because my French accent was so terrible.
Boy,
I feel like they hired you. That was sort of their.
You'd think it was part of the interview. Say bonjour.
If they think your accent was bad, they should have interviewed me. I'd completely out of the water.
So I love what the birds can do, but I don't go above and beyond on the finishing. Basically.
It still tastes good.
Oh, yeah. It's like chicken.
Yeah, but
Good chicken.
yeah, good chicken. I think that something a lot of folks don't realize that there is indeed a flavor difference.
Mm-hmm. It's really pronounced after 12 weeks.
Yeah, because of Cornish cross that you're getting in the store, well, those things are processed when they're 7 or 8 weeks old. I mean, good golly, they ought to taste like eggs at that age. But they don't start developing much of a flavor profile until they hit 9 weeks. And then it kind of peaks at about 16 weeks. So when you're processing your birds, I mean, you're just at the prime point for having really good flavorful birds. And a lot of folks, it's a different flavor. A lot of folks are kind of shocked by it. It's a, I don't want to say a gamey taste, but it's a very rich, full flavored meat.
The texture is different too.
Yes. Once you try a bird that's reached that peak in flavor profile, oh man, it's like night and day. Seriously.
It's when you want to keep your spices real low. Like there's no reason to excessively season them like you have to with Cornish cross. Like I've seen people smother, cover, fill, inject, and torture the Cornish cross meat bird just to get flavor into it. But on the heritage birds, when they're older and they have their own flavor, you don't need to overdo it.
I just totally lost my train of thought. My age.
Well, good. We'll talk about Conrad.
Okay, go ahead, Conrad.
he agrees that even here, back when eating your own birds was a thing, milk mash was big back when they used to take one of their testicles out. Yeah.
Yeah, it helps with finishing in other varieties too, but the propensity to layer on the fat's a little bit different. I noticed that can vary significantly from one variety or bloodline to another. And that was surprising because going into it, I thought dual purpose was dual purpose and all the birds were going to be the same.
Not so.
Nope, they're all different. Even within the same breed, you can get different results.
Well, so even like you said, even what you find, even within your birds, bred
the
same.
Yeah, I still see variation in my own flock.
Exactly. That's why we're here. Yeah. If there wasn't variation, there would be no use in breeding.
We wouldn't have any questions.
Mandelyn, let me ask you, we've talked about your breeding practices and your selection practices and the things you like and the things you don't like, but let's talk about your nutritional program for your birds. What do you like to, how do you like to start your baby chicks?
I do a blanket 20% from hatch all the way through until I see consistent egg laying. And then I might dip it down to an 18%. I do use store-bought feeds. I'm not doing a custom mix. Mm-hmm. And I am adding in the Fertrell breeder showbird supplement. Mm-hmm. And it probably took 2 weeks before I saw differences in the birds. Because I don't have the luxury of free-ranging everyone all day, every day. Mm-hmm. I would lose them. We've got bobcats now. Those are new. We didn't used to have bobcats. The usual assortment. Oh, thank you. It's exciting. I heard the boys can go 30 miles or more. But so I would love to free range them. The best hatching eggs I've ever hatched came from birds that were on full-time free range with supplemental evening feeding. 100% hatches were easy. But once that free range is gone, now you have to try to supplement your way into it and feed them in a way that you can get that similar result.
Yeah. You say you use store-bought feed. It, off the top of your head, do you know what your levels of lysine and methionine are?
Too low. That's why I supplement.
Good answer.
I've been listening, Rip.
That one. No.
Now I flipped that bag around and looked at it going, all right, well, that explains a lot. And it's a decent brand. It's not junk.
And then to give you credit, you then did something about it. You didn't just lament the fact that you couldn't find something better.
I found taking action is the most helpful way to see progress.
Whoa, that's crazy talk. I thought just complaining about it on Facebook.
Oh, that's a good quote. I'm going to steal that one.
Say it again.
I already forgot it.
Taking action is the
best way to see results.
We've got it recorded, not a problem.
Okay, good.
Mandelyn, we're getting down to the tail end here, but if you had to start all over again, is there some things you would do differently, and why?
I would have immediately gone out and find mentors so that I wouldn't have had to spend more than a decade stumbling around in the dark. But if I wouldn't have learned what I've learned from personal experience if I hadn't stumbled through for that experience. So there's nothing I would change or do differently, because where I'm at now and what I'm doing now is a result of everything I've been through with them.
Mm-hmm.
So no, nothing to change. I'll just do better tomorrow. And
Well, as long as tomorrow's better than today, you're ahead of the game. You're way ahead of most people, that's for sure. So let's talk about somebody new that's just starting out, just a brand new, I got to have chickens person. What would you advise them to do?
definitely think about what your flock goals are and what you expect from them, and then go on that little learning adventure of trying different varieties. You'll find what your favorites are. You'll find the ones that you prefer. You'll start to learn more about chickens in general by being a little bit experimental. Because like if you go to a hatchery and you buy 20 of all the same variety and you give those a go for your first year, it's not going to give you a fair representation of that breed, and it's also not going to give you a fair representation of general chickendom. But if you went and did 3 to 5 each of different varieties, then you can start to figure out where you want to go with your flock, and you can kind of shape your flock goals through experimentation. Because if you don't like them, you're not going to stick with it.
Exactly.
So you have to find what you like. And if it's a silky, have at it. If it's a Polish, have at it. If it's something big and slow growing because they're super impressive when they are 2 years old, and you want to do like a Jersey Giant or a Brahma or a Niederrheiner or something big and bulky and impressive, then try them.
I thought for a minute just talking about reds, mining Karen's reds being slow growing, but
No,
okay.
she went way further than that. Yeah. But that almost all comes down to knowing your goal. What you just said. Like, you know what I mean? Like, your goal is what shaped what you wanted in your birds.
If all you need is breakfast eggs and you don't really want to think too hard about it, you just want them to be productive for 2 years, get sex links. They're absolutely foolproof. Pick a red or a black color, feed them 16% layer. They're going to blow out so many eggs in 2 years, and then you get to go get a brand new flock because they're probably not going to be productive much longer after that. But they were fantastic while you had them. And they're going to keep you.
I'm going to vote against that, but okay. No, actually, I will vote that you start that way. There's no reason to learn on an expensive designer bird. Yeah.
And then you can go fancier and evolve.
And I don't even have to say fancy. You just better. Healthier.
And then before you know it, you're at a show with some modern games.
Please don't let that be my life. Yeah. Yes, I just got in trouble. Sorry.
I was going to do something, and now y'all got me so bumfuzzled. I don't know what it was. We had one picture that we didn't talk about. I'm going to throw it up there.
Okay.
But just to me, this just indicates that there's people out there besides me and Karen that will actually weigh their birds at various stages. So what do you see here with these birds?
I see half a pound at 2 weeks old.
Is that your goal? I mean, is that something you're striving for?
That bird turned out really decent as far as growth. I ended up not keeping him, but the growth trajectory was great for that season. And that's what I do like to see. If I could get that consistently, I'll be happy. And then I just have to figure out how not to lose it. Because you can breed yourself somewhere great and trash it the next season with a couple of birds that didn't do the favors you were hoping for. So once you get somewhere, then it's figuring out the maintenance and keeping them good.
Karen, we're getting down to the short rows here. Do we have any more questions that we haven't gotten
Not,
to?
not really. But look, even in this tiny picture, I can tell that must be Rob from the Purple Poultry Project. But
Don't pick on Rob. He's a good guy.
Purple Poultry. No, I'm
Well,
kidding.
Mandelyn, thank you so much for spending an hour or so with us and devoting that time to help us. Not only did I enjoy
Where can people find her videos? Because they are all excellent. We talked about them in the beginning, but where are we looking? Do you have a YouTube channel?
Yeah, YouTube under Arcadian Orchard, which is the goofy farm name I came up with.
Sorry, Rip. I talked over you.
But that's okay. But when I first saw Arcadian Orchard, we have a town here in Florida named Arcadia. And I thought, oh, somebody down south of me's got some pretty good looking birds here.
Well, so I wanted to do Eden's Orchard, and it was already taken. So I started looking at words with a similar meaning, and Arcadia was one. And I didn't like the ring of Arcadia Orchard, so I threw an N on the end of it. So Arcadian Orchard. We have apple trees, it counts. I mean,
but especially anybody doing selection young, or just watch them. You'll get so many tips. She changed the way I transport my birds. She changed
those flip lid totes are pretty amazing.
I mean, a huge difference in storage, and they work great, and they're in and
you
out.
Can stack them.
Yeah.
Well, so, I'm going to say something, and y'all are both going to be ticked at me for saying it, but too bad. But if I could be more like you two, I would be a much better poultry breeder than I am today. I admire both of you and your skills and your knowledge and your willingness to share. So my hat's off to you guys, or you gals.
I heard someone say once that you were called the string maker for your ability to create showbirds. So you weren't bad at
it. String maker or string man?
It might have been string man.
Yeah. String man was somebody who had a lot of different breeds that he would go from county fair to state fair, and they had this string of birds, and they had this route that they take. Many of them would have their own railroad cars to haul their birds. They would have 200 or 300 birds, and that's how they made their living, off the show premiums at the fairs.
Huh.
I never made a living off of chickens, trust me. Lost a lot of money.
Yeah, so your wife turned it off right then. Yeah.
I thoroughly loved it, and I wish my back would allow me to do it again, because I would be into it up to my neck if I could. But I think, at least for me, and I know you've expressed similar feelings, Mandelyn, it's been about the people more for me than it has been about the birds.
Yeah, I've met a lot of great people, and they're usually a lot friendlier than even like the dog show world. I showed dogs for a little while. I don't do that anymore.
I've heard the horse show people are even nicer.
I used to braid horse hair at the shows and coach little girls, and I kept it with the juniors, because once you go into the adults, things change. They have cliques. It's fun. Like, if you go with friends, it's a good time. But if you go there by yourself and you don't know anybody.
The one experience I had at the horse show, and I worked at the Florida State Fair, and they called me to go down and do something at the horse show area, and I went by one of the vendors, and I saw all these looked like horses' tails hanging up, all different colors and different lengths and all that. And when I got through the
Appaloosas who don't have tails,
I asked him, I said, what's this? She said, it's hair pieces for horses. And I thought, gee, I've just been looking for one for myself, much less, but it was an eye opener. Well, Mandelyn, thank you again so much. And I really appreciate it. I do have one little PSA I want to get into here.
Well, this was fun. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, well,
I appreciate it.
You've been a good sport, and it's been a fun time. Not only an educational time, but a fun time.
Now we're picking on the poor rabbit breeders.
Well, some of them are fun too. I just never got into it. I can't butcher rabbits. I don't know what it is. They're too cute or something, but I couldn't. I went and bought some great rabbits. They were I guess dual purpose in the sense that you can eat them and breed more from them. But I couldn't do it. They were too endearing.
I love fried rabbit.
I added
fried
turkeys.
rabbit.
All right, Rip, I'm sorry. Do we need to talk about? All right.
Yeah.
We need to talk about the podcast.
We are going to talk about the podcast. Folks, if you haven't noticed, we have a podcast going now, the Poultry Keepers Podcast. And John Gunnerman is my co-host on that show. We've got 2 episodes live now. We just started last week. Last Tuesday was our first release, and we introduced episode 2 today. And, you know, I think it's catching on pretty quick. If you've not seen it, you can find it on, Buzzsprout is where we host it, buzzsprout.com.
It's everywhere. You did a good job. It's everywhere you find podcasts.
It's on Apple. It's on Amazon. And like Karen said, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So it's not hard to find. Just go in and search for Poultry Keepers Podcast. We've got the next episode. We'll have Jeff Maddox on there. He doesn't know it, but we snagged a pre-recorded show with him.
With permission.
Well, yeah, sort of. We shouldn't pick on Jeff. He's not here to defend himself. But we're having a lot of fun with the show. It comes out every week on Tuesday mornings at 4 a.m. for you early risers. I did that.
It might take till 7 till I hear it.
But give it a listen, folks, and let us know what you think about it. We got some really good topics lined up, and hopefully you're going to find it useful information. So, with that said, gosh, thanks for listening, folks. It's I can't believe we've gone. I can't believe it's been an hour already. My gosh, it's just been a.
It could have turned into 5 if you kept asking questions.
Well,
he even skipped a few. I'll tell you that. So yeah.
Well, she'd already covered them.
There you go.
Until next time, you know, keep enjoying your birds and keep studying to learn more that will help your birds. That's how you're going to grow in this hobby. So.
And Rip, go weigh your birds.
Man.
Every 2 weeks, you only need to catch the early ones. You don't have to do it much after 12 weeks.
I will say these red chicks that I've got now are the most uniform body sizes.
That's just an excuse. You don't know that because you didn't weigh them.
Yeah, I did. I don't have the numbers here on top of in front of me, but I did. But they're very consistent, and they got good genetics and good feed. And John wants you to come back, Mandy.
Maybe next time I'll put a live bird behind me instead of those fake metal ones.
Yeah, or bring one of your turkeys and just let him ramble around the room, you know. But,
I can't laugh without them gobbling every time. It would drown me out.
They'd never survive our show then. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening. We appreciate you. We love you. Enjoy your birds, and we'll catch you next time in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.